Good afternoon. Yes, thank you. Oh, we have some alert people out here. It must be the coffee in the front. So thank you all so much for coming to the Wilson Center today for the European Joint Programming Initiative, Opportunities for U.S. EU Research Collaboration and Societal Changes. I'm so excited to see so many people engaged in how we can increase our collaboration across the Atlantic with the U.S. and EU. My name is Elizabeth Newberry. I am a director in the Science and Technology Innovation Program here at the Wilson Center. I'm stepping in, unfortunately, for my colleague, Ann Bowser, who has gotten the flu. And we strongly encourage, even though I'm sure she could power through it, to stay home and rest up. So thank you again all for joining us. Again, I would like to point out that there's wireless access around the, posted around the room. Feel free to tweet about this particular event. Tweet at Bilat USA 4.0 or at Wilson STIP, that's S-T-I-P. And we are excited to have you here. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Berna Vindishba, who is the Bilat USA 4.0 project manager and the Research Promotion Agency. And she was going to give a quick overview about the program. Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm going to mention a little bit about Bilat USA and the story how we came here today. As I said, it's a Horizon 20, Bilat USA 4.0 is a Horizon 2020 funded project which aims to strengthen science and technological cooperation between European Union and the United States. It started in 2016, will last 3 years. We have 10 European partners from 9 countries and 6 US partners in this project. Well, what do we do mainly in this Bilat USA action? One of our main goals is to promote Horizon 2020 and other European research area initiatives, and joint programming initiatives is being one of those, for EU-US science and technological cooperation. And then we try to enhance cooperation between scientists and innovation actors through targeted thematic research innovation workshops, matchmaking sessions and seminars based on the priority topics set by the United States and the European Commission, which are indicated in the roadmap for internationalization of the European Commission. We also facilitate program-level cooperation between European and US funding organizations, so this joint programming initiative falls under these activities. And we provide information on mutual funding opportunities beyond Horizon 2020, including Horizon 2020, but beyond Horizon 2020, especially the bilateral programs and bilateral funding opportunities between EU member states and the United States. And how did we get here? It was a long journey so far. It all started with a survey that we made to JPIs back in May 2016 to identify their needs and interest in cooperation with USA, China, and Brazil, in cooperation with 2 other Horizon 2020 initiatives that target Brazil and China, which is followed by a kind of a fact-finding mission to US. We visited a number of US agencies who are present today in June 2016 to explain what the joint programming initiatives are, what is the links with the Horizon 2020, what are the difference. So for the majority of the agencies, it was actually the first time they heard the joint programming initiatives. They were very familiar with the Horizon 2020, but JPIs were the first time that they heard. But then there was an interest which followed a workshop in Brussels in November 2016. 5 representatives from 4 state funding agencies and 1 NGO from US came to Brussels and met 9 out of 10 JPIs. And we did little matchmaking, kind of a speed dating exercise there as well, where they expressed very briefly their interest and common areas. And last, following this, beginning of Monday this week, we had a very intensive bilateral meetings between the JPIs. There are 6 JPIs here today participating, and US funding agencies. So they went into deep of the discussions. They established new contacts and deepened the existing interactions. So the meetings took place in Washington, D.C., Maryland, Virginia, and in Atlanta. Where do we go from here? We will hear soon from the JPIs because they will mention briefly what they have discussed in the last 2 days. So our mission as Bilateral USA was kind of a matchmaking. So we, in that sense, completed our mission. We established the contacts, and we really hope that those flames will continue to burn, and we hope to pave the way to collaboration in dealing with the societal challenges together. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that wonderful metaphor. And now, without further ado, I'd also like to introduce Mary Kavanagh, the Minister Council of Research and Innovation for the European Union delegation.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's really a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you to the Woodrow Wilson Centre and to Bilat USA 4.0 for inviting me to say a few introductory words. Most of you will be very familiar with Horizon 2020, which we speak about very often here in the United States, and which is the main European-level funding programme for research and innovation. It has some $80 billion over 7 years and is the largest multilateral research funding program in the world. It focuses on finding solutions to global societal challenges, to promoting scientific excellence and industrial leadership. And of course, it's open to the world. However, Horizon 2020 is only part of the picture of the European research landscape. It represents less than 10% of the total research investment in Europe, the vast majority of which is funded through the member states of the European Union. And of course, it was realized several years ago that member states combining forces, both financial and scientific, of their research programs would lead to huge benefits in scale and scope for all. Such cooperation would allow for faster solutions to challenges, including, for example, addressing climate change, ensuring energy and food supply, or a healthy aging population. And from this, the joint programming initiatives were born. Many of you will already know this, but since it's a public meeting, maybe many are not so familiar with this. So I'll just give a quick overview of the JPIs. The aim of the Joint Programming Initiative is to pool national research efforts in order to make better use of Europe's precious public research and development resources and to tackle common European challenges more effectively in a number of key areas. It's a structured and strategic process whereby member states agree on a voluntary basis and in a partnership approach on common visions and on a strategic research agenda to address major societal challenges. Then, on a variable geometry basis, member states commit to joint programming, where they implement together these strategic research agendas. So, joint programming combines strategic framework, a bottom-up approach, and high-level commitment from the member states. There are currently about 10 JPIs, of whom, as you heard earlier, 6 are represented here today, and you'll hear a lot more later. The Commission, the European Commission for which I work, facilitates the joint programming process and can support the member states for joint programming by, for example, financing support actions to support their management, to launch possible complementary measures to actions undertaken by the JPIs, and by linking the JPIs to international actions and bodies where the Commission represents the European Union. It's a real pleasure for me here to see the ambition of the JPIs expand internationally. And I hope that the meetings that started in Brussels, as already presented back in 2016, and the meetings that you have had this week will lead to very fruitful transatlantic cooperation in the future. I'm looking forward to hearing about some of the discussions that you had and the outcomes, and I wish you a very fruitful meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Our next part of the agenda, I'm going to turn over to Jackie Wood, the Acting Executive Director for JPI and Oceans.
Thank you, and good afternoon to everybody. And what a privilege and pleasure it is to be here in the Woodrow Wilson Centre. I just looked up the motto: independent research, open dialogue, actionable ideas. If we can take that with us through the course of the afternoon, I think we'll be doing a good job. So I'm here on behalf of all of the joint programme initiatives to give you a very brief overview of what they're about. And in fact, this has already been started by Mary, so I'll just put a little more flesh on the bones of that. As Mary says, there are currently 10 joint programme initiatives running. We have a lot of similarities. We also have quite a few differences, but there are some things that are really strong between us, and we work well together. And that's a symbol also of this mission and the work that has gone into it by Berna and her colleagues. So what really is the role of the joint programme initiatives in the European landscape? It's about getting the most from this national funding, which is not coordinated through the common pot of the Horizon 2020 programme. As Mary said, she says 10%, I say about 15%, it varies, of the funding for research and innovation in Europe, public funding, is channelled from the member states through the Horizon 2020 programme. But that leaves 85-90%, a lot of money, which is in the national system, it's in the agencies, it's in the institutions, it comes from in-kind funding, projects already committed. And what the JPIs are trying to do is make best use of those national investments in research and innovation, and doing that by collaborating between countries in Europe, but also more widely. So in doing that, we're trying to set strategic agendas to align research programmes, to get the best value for money, avoid duplication, and really set some common goals for joint actions, because the challenges that we're trying to address are bigger than any one programme, bigger than any one country. There really are global societal challenges. So as I say, we've got to about 12 to 15% going through the framework programmes. It's also about leveraging, getting the best value from this money by helping to facilitate others to come and work with us. If we can put out commitments, then others are willing to perhaps put money on the table or bring in-kind resources to the table as well. It's a very flexible mechanism. The JPIs are dynamic, evolving. They are, in many ways, the new kids on the block. My challenge today is to try to explain JPIs to you. As Mary said, the framework programmes and Horizon 2020 now have been around for some 30 years or so. So there's a fair degree of understanding in the community. The JPIs are going to be celebrating their 10th birthday for some of them this year. Some are even younger than that. So it's not surprising that it's a mechanism which is less known currently. And we have a job to do to explain that to you. So what is it all about? It's addressing the grand challenges, Mary's already said, initiative of the European and the European Associate Area, member states and the Commission, and it's really looking at the big societal challenges. Coordinating public research at national, regional, but also at international levels where it makes sense to do so, developing joint initiatives and aligning national research strategies. And in some areas where we have countries who've got very strong national strategies, we've brought them together with countries who have had less developed activities in this area. And some of those countries have even adopted the JPI strategies as their own. So we're bringing them up to a common understanding, a common level, and then working together very closely. There are 10 joint programme initiatives now, established since 2008, and the basis for those is something which is a legal decision of the Council of Ministers. So this is not just an initiative of the Commission, it's something which is agreed by those countries who wish to participate in the joint programme initiatives. And Mary has already mentioned that rather strange European phrase that we use, that they operate by variable geometry. I'd rather use a French phrase, they're à la carte. You can pick and choose which one you want to be involved in. You can pick and choose which actions you want to be involved in. So you don't have to be in everything and doing everything. You can choose where you want to involve yourself and where it's going to make the most difference and impact for you as funding agencies. So 10 joint programme initiatives now, 6 represented, but we've got societal challenges around water, oceans, More Years, Better Lives, which is about demographic change and ageing population, antimicrobial resistance, climate and climate issues, the challenges of cities and urbanisation, both in Europe and globally, agriculture, food security and climate change, the impacts there, cultural heritage, which is an area which is not represented here today, but is a fascinating initiative and one where there is less input currently from the Horizon 2020 programmes, so it's a newer one. Healthy Diet for a Healthy Life, and the Joint Programme Initiative on Alzheimer's and neurodegenerative diseases. And I've always said personally that that's the easiest one to understand, because you know what the problem is. It's obvious what the problem is. There's a big population, there are lots of stakeholders, there are lots of players, there's lots of research that's needed, and it sort of makes sense to align all that and put it together and at a national, international level. And that's what we're trying to do with all of the JPIs. That's one perhaps is the easiest to say, yes, it's obvious, why wouldn't you do that? The other's a little bit more challenging. So what do? Well, each of the JPIs has developed a strategic research or innovation agenda. And these are long-term visions, 10 years typically. And as I say, we operate with countries participating where they want to do so. Each of the JPIs has, certainly 15, but probably up to 25 member countries, maybe even more than that. My colleagues will correct me. And we develop tools and mechanisms to act according to the challenge that we're trying to address. So the tools that we use are very flexible, and we can improve those as we go along, as we learn from experience. We do joint calls for projects, of course. That was part of the original rationale in 2008 when the world was booming. We've had to be a bit more pragmatic in recent years, so now a lot more of the focus is on strategic alignment, getting best value for money and impact from our research and innovation investments. And each JPI is different in terms of its structures, how it works, all the rest of it. You probably don't need to know too much about that, but in fact, we also work commonly to both raise a profile of joint programming, but also to explain how these what we call public-public partnerships can complement the work that the Commission is doing in creating the common European research area in Europe. What are the benefits? Well, we've got the obvious ones of collaboration and learning between countries. We can develop very flexible tools and mechanisms, framework conditions for actions. And by bringing the critical mass of a number of funders together, both with the European Commission programmes and with the member countries, we can actually boost the intensity of activity in particular areas for research. We can test out and develop new ways of funding, new ways of cooperation. That's been very successful. And one of the things which is very important, particularly from a European perspective, but also in coming here to the US, I think, is we can learn from each other's experiences. What works, what doesn't work, how can we, as a community of funding organisations, really make a difference and impact with the ever-decreasing budgets that we have. So the Joint Programme Initiatives act on the whole research funding planning cycle. We carry out foresight activities, planning initiatives. We've adopted common strategic agendas. We can synchronise funding, have joint calls, lever funding from other sources and other programmes, perhaps, by having our own critical mass, and then taking projects and activities through implementation, looking at the impacts and the outreach measures, evaluation of reporting, and then in all of the actions, and certainly the actions of the project, JPI Oceans, which I'm responsible for, we're trying to build in some of the other factors: capacity building, knowledge exchange, science to policy interfaces, ocean literacy, better understanding, all of the softer things that go with a research programme that are really important if you're going to make a real impact. Oops, sorry, that was the wrong one. Now, a number of you have already asked me this week, well, so what actually is the difference between the Horizon 2020 programme, the European programme, and the joint programming initiatives? And this slide is a little bit sort of governance-y, but I think it tries to make a difference, to try to make that distinction. So from the JPI side, as I've already mentioned, established by the decisions of the European Council, that's the member states, and implemented by the countries themselves. So the countries, at the level of joint programming, choose what they want to take forward, set the agendas, decide which actions to take, which priorities to address when. We act in this strange variable geometry way, which means if something is not important for you, you don't have to be part of it. But on the other hand, we act with a critical mass of countries who really want to drive things forward in a particular activity area. And we can draw on not just a wide range of existing tools, but we can develop new tools and new ways of collaborating to actually make a difference to address a specific problem that we're trying to take forward. So we've got a long-term perspective, and as wouldn't be here if it wasn't open to international participation. Certainly that's something that the JPIs are increasingly doing. From the outset, the JPIs in principle have already had this ambition to grow and to work with countries around the world. But certainly in the case of JPI Oceans, we decided initially it would make more sense to develop our strategic research and innovation agenda first, to decide what our member countries wanted to do, and then to look for synergies with others. So that's how we've approached it, and that's why for us now, having our strategic agenda adopted in 2015 and beginning to put actions in place, this is a really good time to start the wider dialogue. Going on to the Horizon 2020 programme, I know many of you are more familiar with it, but it's a legalistically longer process to establish, going through the European Parliament and the European Council in something called co-decision procedure. It involves the European countries plus the European states, and it's, in a sense, an agreed fixed programme over a 7-year budget funding cycle with common pot funding. Projects themselves are generally of fixed duration. They are typically 3, sometimes a little bit longer, years in duration, and there is, generally speaking, in response to calls for proposals. And the Horizon programme itself, although it also has a wide range of tools, those are fixed in the legal statutes, so they are relatively strictly defined compared to what JPI Ocean's flexibility has in place. As Mary has already said, of course, open to international participation according to the various programme rules. What both have in common, and I think this is very important to say, is the desire for excellent science, for real impact, and for making a difference, particularly with the societal challenges that we're each addressing. So going back to the JPIs for a second, as I said, we're similar, but we're all different. But in terms of governance, we have a relatively similar model. We have an overall decision-making body. We call it a management board in JPI Ocean. Some call it a governing board. It varies. It has the same role. It's the national representatives at the level of the funding agencies or ministries who are participating in the JPI, and typically 1 vote per country. Each of the JPIs has the European Commission as an observer to that table. We find that really valuable. Day-to-day management goes through a secretariat, typically. Some of those are located in Brussels, including JPI Oceans. Some are dispersed around the funding agencies and other partners within the JPI community. And then we have task force working groups, actions led by 1 or more country management board members, which we take forward in variable geometry, different times, different ways, according to what's needed. And for each of the joint programme initiatives, we're also guided by external advisors. For some, those are individual experts representing the community. For others, they can be stakeholder groups representing and bringing the views of particular organisations that we really want to work with. So again, that varies. We've already touched on the fact that the JPIs are now looking to see where it makes sense to have a wider international participation. Most of us already do, I have to say. Some countries are already full members of JPI Ocean, of the JPIs. In our case, for JPI Oceans, we've been pleased to have the participation of the US, Canada and New Zealand as guests, as observers to the management board since November 2015. So there are links already in place and being further developed. And some stats from the Commission's own monitoring service say that there are now more participants, international participants, twice as high in what we call these P2P networks, the JPIs and the ERANETs, than there are in the actual Horizon 2020 projects themselves. So I think that's an example of where we're really reaching out and making a difference. And that provides leverage, and I know leverage is a word that's well used and well understood in the US, and we all want to lever off each other. We've all got targets to do that, but it's an important part of how we work and how we can perhaps work with you. Going on to how we work or can work with you, you as funders may wish to engage with us in a number of different ways. At the top, the joint programme initiatives can provide a gateway to some of the research, some of the expertise that's in the European environment, and we can help make connections just to some of the projects that are ongoing. That makes a lot of sense. If there's a stronger interest in being an observer to the meetings, bringing some commitment in terms of actually spending time talking with us, then that's great as well. And that's already happening for a number of countries. As we go down the scale, we can in fact go all the way to saying that US or other countries can become full members of the individual joint programme initiatives with, if they wish, a seat at the table, a vote at the table, and a real ability to get involved both at the level of the actions and at the strategic planning for the programmes. So there are a range of ways into the process. So it's a very brief overview. It's not the easiest thing to explain, but I hope I've given a flavour, and the various colleagues here in the audience are very happy to follow up on the detail. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Sorry, I need to clone myself to make up for the staff that are out for the flu. Now we're going to switch gears a little bit and go to our panel programming. We'll need a second to set up, but as you can see on the agenda, our first panel will be about agriculture and food security, and it will be moderated by Jesse Svento, the Director of Global Operation at the National Council of University Research Administrators. So just a little stretch break while we get set up. Thanks.
Let's have you in the middle.
Yes, we can start.
Good afternoon, everyone. In the interest of time, we are going to start right away because we have 25 minutes for each panel. There are a total of 6 panels, and the first 3 will occur between now and 3:45 p.m. when we have our break. And for each panel, we will ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves and to introduce their program in an elevator pitch, if you will, just 30 to 60 seconds, 1 or 2 sentences at most. And then we will begin with moderated questions for 15 minutes. And after that, we will open it up to the floor for any questions that you will have to either of the panelists, any of the panelists. As Liz explained, I am Jesse Zito. I am the director of NCURA Global. NCURA is the National Council of University Research Administrators, which is a membership association of 7,000 members of people who manage and direct research grants and the research agenda at a university. We are a member of the Horizon 2020 funded project, Bilat USA 4.0, and we have been partnering with FFG, with Berna, in organizing this workshop. Our interest in this, as we hear from our members, is that we would love to see greater collaboration from the funding agencies because our researchers, our members, our faculty are interested in collaborating, and they would love to be able to have the opportunities to do so. So without further ado, our first panel is with JPI FACE and also with USDA NIFA. And I will turn to the panelists, Carolyn and Otto, if you could please introduce yourselves, and then a quick elevator pitch, if you will, of your programs.
Sure. Thank you very much, Jesse. My name's Caroline Lesser, and I work for the Secretariat of the Joint Programming Initiative on Agriculture, Food Security and Climate Change, FACE JPI. I coordinate the initiative's international relations as well as relations with stakeholders. And if I may, can I do my pitch now?
Yes.
So our JPI is working on global challenges that lie at the nexus of agriculture, food security, and climate change. We, for example, look at how to produce more food more efficiently, but with less negative impacts on the environment in order to meet increasing food demand. We also look at how to transition to more resilient agricultural and food systems in order to adapt to climate change, and how the agricultural sector, which is currently responsible for 10 to 12% of global greenhouse gas emissions, can help mitigate those emissions. There are 22 member countries in our initiatives, 18 are EU member states, 3 are associated countries to the Horizon 2020 program, and we also have a non-EU country that recently joined, New Zealand. We've launched between 2012 and 2017, we've launched 10 different programs or activities. They consist in joint calls for research, but also networks of experts and mechanisms to coordinate national calls for research. And those different programs have mobilized over 100 million euros that mainly originated from national research budgets. And I think my 22 seconds are up, so.
Thank you, Carolyn. Otto?
Oh, thanks, Caroline. Thank you, Jesse. Hi, everyone. My name is Otto Gonzales. I work for the United States Department of Agriculture, or USDA. And as many of you may know, what we do at USDA is provide leadership. Leadership on food, agriculture, natural resources, rural development, nutrition, and we provide that leadership based on public policy, the best available science, and effective management. And on the best available science is where the particular part of USDA I work at comes in. USDA implements its program through a family of agencies, and one of those agencies is the National Institute of Food and Agriculture. We're the extramural science funding part of USDA. And so when we talk about the best available science, we know that much of that science is available right here in the United States, but not all of it. We know that we can learn in partnering with other countries, and that is really the reason that we're so happy to have the opportunity to be involved with FACE JPI. At USDA, the National Institute of Food and Agriculture, I'm the director of the Center for International Programs, which is a small team that works with all the different parts of our agency in helping to develop collaborative opportunities for international cooperation. We work with the sister agencies in USDA, such as our Agricultural Research Service and other research agencies in USDA, and our Office of the Chief Scientist. And I think that's my introduction, then we can go on from there.
Great, wonderful. Thank you, Otto. Thank you, Caroline. My first question to you is, can you explain to us how you have collaborated in the past? What has led you to this particular panel where you are discussing collaboration? What steps did you take in order to get here?
Well, I can mention one, and actually, Jesse, one that you're very familiar with, because it was in June of 2016 that our friends at the Agricultural Research Service, as I mentioned, another agency within the family of USDA agencies, had met with you and with Berna, who gave remarks earlier, and suggested that you all meet with us at the National Institute of Food and Agriculture. So we were very happy to meet you at that time. And as Berna was mentioning, that visit you had in June of 2016 was our first exposure to some of the JPIs. Actually, some of our colleagues had prior experience with FACE JPI and were very eager to have the opportunity to try to develop more opportunities with you all. So that led to us participating in some of the other activities you mentioned, you were shown earlier, and we've had conference calls and other discussions, and now I had the pleasure of meeting Caroline in person back in late 2016, and here we are again, but have made significant progress on collaboration. So
Carolyn, anything you want to add to that?
Well, I think Otto has summarized it well. Maybe one thing to add is that we started working with USDA NIFA via a global platform or global alliance called the Global Research Alliance on Agricultural Greenhouse Gases. So back in 2013, our initiative launched a multi-partner call on greenhouse gas agricultural greenhouse gas mitigation with three members of that alliance, of which USDA NIFA. So we started working on a particular topic, and thanks to the interactions we've had via the bilateral USA workshops, we're trying to see how we could eventually expand that cooperation. But we've already had a first successful cooperation at the level of a specific activity.
Excellent. What are the topics that you have found that dovetail, that interest you both, that fit both your missions?
Well, fortunately, we found a few that we can describe with you today. One is a shared interest in new technologies and how these new technologies can really improve agricultural production and really ensure food security. One of the areas of new technology that we found particularly interesting is that of sensors that can be used for a variety of reasons. As we know that sensors that are being developed which can sense soil moisture and plant water requirements, sensors that can be utilized to detect different types of pathogens in agricultural systems. We see this as a promising area of new technologies, and one that NIFA, the National Institute of Food and Agriculture at the U.S. Department of Agriculture, has already invested in. At our part of USDA, we invest in research, education, and extension activities throughout the United States. Actually, every state receives investments from us, mainly through the land grant university system, but also through non-land grant universities and other institutions as well. And we know that there's wide interest in this area. There's a lot of expertise that we have in the U.S. that we can share with colleagues in Europe, and we also can learn much from them as well, because we have to meet a lot of the same challenges. So this sensor area is one, and there are some others. Maybe Caroline, you want to mention a couple?
Sure, thank you, Otto. Yes, we've actually identified three major areas where we would like to explore further collaboration. So the second one consists in looking at approaches to develop more resilient and sustainable food systems and value chains under a changing climate. So assessing risks that emerge from climate change on different food value chains and developing approaches to address those risks, and make global food value chains more resilient. Another area where we thought we could explore collaboration is in the area of modeling. FACE JPI has launched as one of its first pilot activities a network of modelers, which is called MAXER, Modeling the Impacts of Climate Change on Agriculture. And we are currently, our members are currently thinking of revisiting a little bit the mandate of that network that brings together over 300 scientists from 18 different countries who have an opportunity to exchange knowledge and expertise on those different modeling techniques, but also generate new research and engage in capacity building. And we see this, as we're currently rethinking, let's say, the mandate of that network, we see here an opportunity also to work with USDA NIFA on maybe integrating additional issues in that modeling work, such as plant and livestock pests and pathogens, and things like that. So since we are reflecting on the future work of that network, we thought of associating USDA and NIFA in those reflections too, to see if we can find some common ground here.
Yep. And I'll add, and that really connects back into our first area of the new technologies, because again, if we're investing in sensors and able to acquire large sets of data from a variety of different circumstances, well, then how do we manage those data? How do we utilize them in areas of precision agriculture and a number of different other areas. And so being able to bring the data generators and the modelers together can really improve the application of the data for those different areas that we talked about.
Excellent, excellent. What are the concrete steps that you have agreed on in terms of making these collaborations real?
Well, we've had a few.
Maybe even including timelines if you want to.
Okay. Well, one action we're looking for next month, actually, is to convene a conference call. And we're actually going to, although they don't know it yet, we're going to invite our friends at the National Science Foundation to participate in this. We have had a number of different collaborations at USDA through the National Institute of Food and Agriculture with NSF. And we're thinking this area, again, of new technologies is one where there could be a very productive collaboration. And so we're going to propose to have a conference call in February with NSF and us and FACE JPI to really talk about how we might collaborate and move ahead in this area of new technologies with a focus on sensors, but perhaps other areas as well.
Yes, if I may add one thing about this, we have, in FACE JPI, we haven't had a lot of work on that issue as of now. So it's really, again, a good timing, a good opportunity to start reflecting on this issue together with partners that have had a lot of experience already in this area. So we find this a good timing, a good opportunity.
Yeah. And I'll just add, by expanding the number of experts and sites, we can expand the number of different types of species, environmental conditions, and so really being able to work with the whole network that FACE JPI has in Europe and beyond with our researchers in the United States really will add a lot to the available data sets, improve the modeling, and overall, I think help everybody advance their work in this area.
Another next step which we discussed was in relation to the issue of resilient food value chains. We have been working with another international platform called the Belmont Forum, which is a network of an international network, of funding agencies. So we've had collaborative work with that network in the past. And the Belmont Forum is currently considering developing some new work on sustainable food systems. And so we are trying to see whether our own planned work in that area could somehow connect or be a subset of that larger activity. And the Belmont Forum includes also some US partners like the NSF. And so that's the main follow-up for that particular topic, is to try to scope our respective activities, let's say, in a synchronized way and see how the two could eventually be linked. Of course, FACE JPI usually has a Eurocentric perspective, but we always like to connect to wider activities. So there's an opportunity there too.
Yes, and another idea that emerged from our discussions was one of assessing together what are the current gaps in modeling work to help farmers better understand the risks and opportunities for agricultural production under a changing climate. And so this would be, again, another area to discuss. We really see the potential to leverage each other's knowledge and experience in these subjects, so that it was mentioned earlier to get, Jackie mentioned, get a better bang for the buck and greater impact. And this is certainly one way to do that.
Great, wonderful. I'd like to open it up to the floor in case there are questions that you have for either panelists. And if you don't, I warn you, I will ask more questions.
Great. Yes, I'll just talk loudly. So, now I'll talk even more loudly. I'm John White from the Consortium for Ocean Leadership and involved with JPI Oceans. Food security, although often talked about in the realm of agriculture, is also certainly relies upon the ocean. And more so the connection between the ocean, agriculture, aquaculture, mariculture, fisheries management, ocean sustainability, and food security is becoming understood and pursued. My question is, at the JPI level, what type of connections, if any, under partnership programs between the JPIs are there, and have there been some successes in bringing sort of the agriculture lobby and the ocean lobby together in partnerships that either have or we can look forward to having some positive outcomes?
Yes. Thank you for your question. It's quite timely, as actually we haven't had that much work so far, but we have been reflecting together with our colleagues from JPI Oceans and JPI Healthy Diets for a Healthy Life on ways to collaborate on the issue of food and nutrition security. So trying to find an activity that would cut across our three let's say, strategic research agendas, and trying to look at food and nutrition security from the perspective of the three JPIs. I haven't been directly involved in that reflection, but the idea right now is to try to set up a knowledge hub. And so I cannot say a lot more because this is currently under discussion, but we certainly are aware of the issue you raised and are trying to construct something across our three JPIs to work on that issue of food and nutrition security. Also because the European Commission has or is developing a food and nutrition policy called the Food 2030 policy framework, and that type of collaborative work across our three JPIs could certainly support that policy area.
Great, wonderful. We have two more questions here too.
Venkat Lakshmi, NSF Hydrological Sciences. At the NSF, in collaboration with USDA, we've had a program called Infuse for a few years, and this has funded a lot of investigators who have to bring together three separate directorates or USDA together, and most of the times it is geo engineering and USDA. And one of the things we talked about with JPI Fashi was trying to see if we can do a collaborative joint call, like the call now going on between CBET, run by CBET between NSF and NSF China, which is on Infuse. So food and water and energy issues in China and US together. And the second thing we discussed is about RCNs, or regional research collaboration networks, to try to bring all this stuff together, because many people do a lot of stuff and they establish networks, but sometimes two different networks don't talk to each other. So I'm sorry, it's not a question. I just added it.
No,
But
it's
if
a
I
great
could,
addition, yeah.
Yes, if I could just respond briefly on the RCN. I know there was discussion on how can we link that with the knowledge hubs of FACE JPI. And thank you for mentioning Infuse, because we really see that collaboration with NSF, USDA's collaboration with NSF on the innovations at the nexus of food, energy, water systems, really as a model collaboration, and one that if we can replicate that type of relationship, I think it would be quite productive for in a number of different areas. So thank you for mentioning that.
We have a question at the back.
Thank you, Melissa Hurst, strategy and risk consultant. I have a two-part question that are not related. One is there any intention to actually look at the relationship between food systems insecurity and political instability as part of the overall programming? And second of all, on sensors, are you looking at any of the sensor collected data from the military or in the intelligence community? I guess it's three parts. Third would be, are you looking to actually develop new sensors, or are you looking to apply commercial off-the-shelf sensors towards the programs that you have? Thank you.
Maybe I can start with the sensors part.
Yes.
Because some of the research that NIFA has supported, the sensors have been sensors, for example, that are placed in agricultural systems. So, as I mentioned, I think as an example, sensors that are placed either in or on plants to understand what the plant water requirements are. You can also do the sensors in the soil as well, but if you can get to the plant itself, then you're really getting more precise information, and the benefit there is that you can more finely tune your water application and other input applications, and ultimately at least reduce them or make them more efficient, so that you are, in that sense, being able to get more for per unit of input than you would otherwise. We haven't invested any. You mentioned military sensors. That isn't something that's within our purview. The other question on food, as far as the relationship between food systems and, I guess, instability there, and I guess civil instability. It is an area that is not squarely within the mandate of USDA. Certainly a very interesting question, and there is research out there that has shown different connections. Hasn't been research that we have necessarily funded, only because it's not part of our mandate.
Yes, just if I can add, the same is true for our own initiative. We haven't looked at issues that relate to political instability because it's not in our focus.
Great, thank you. We've come to the end of our time for this first panel, but I actually did have another question, which I would invite all of you to ask them at the networking session, which is what did they learn from meeting each other, both here this time around and then also last year, actually 2016, November 2016 in Brussels. And what was it that you learned from those meetings that made this collaboration possible? So we'll leave that to the glasses of wine that we'll have later.
They're all on the edge of their seats now.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jesse. Thank you, Carl.
Welcome, gentlemen. As we did with the other panelists, if we could start off with you introducing yourself and a brief pitch, if you will, of your programs under your purview.
Well, thank you very much for inviting us. And my name is Patrik Fagerstedt. I'm a senior research officer at the Swedish Research Council, which is hosting the secretariat for the JPIMR. And if I take the pitch directly, since I have it written down in front of me now. So the JPIMR aims to coordinate and support all types of research that can contribute to our ability to treat infections to microbes also in the future. As you know, the increasing threat of bacteria resistant to antibiotics spreading in hospitals, the community, among farm animals and the environment may prevent many aspects of modern healthcare in the future if we don't do something. And our remit does not only include research on developing new antibiotics, but also research for better and more rapid diagnostics, improved stewardship of existing drugs, by decreasing unnecessary use and improve infection control. And in this global effort, we are now 27 countries very interested in developing and strengthening the collaboration with U.S. agencies in all these areas.
Thank you, Patrick. Dr. Dixon?
Thank you, Jesse. Wow, these are tough questions. So my name is Dennis Dixon, and I'm from the National Institutes of Health, National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. I'm a point person for antimicrobial resistance, and that happened because I'm chief of the bacteriology and mycology branch, which hosts many of the hospital pathogens and the poster children that are problematic for treatment these days because of losing effectiveness to the existing antibacterial agents. And that led to a series of activities starting in probably 1999 with the Senator Ted Kennedy hearing on antimicrobial resistance, and then moved on to such things as the Transatlantic Task Force on Antimicrobial Resistance, and I sit on that for the NIH. And I would commend Sweden, first of all, for their responsible involvement in this topic, and they were responsible with the Prime Minister Mats Ulfendal and President Barack Obama in establishing the TATFAR. and also sit on the Presidential Advisory Council on antibacterial resistance for combating antibacterial resistance. And that's CARB, and was involved in helping to develop the national strategy on CARB from the NIH part of that. And so clearly antimicrobial resistance is a global public health problem. It's a top priority for NIH and NIAID, and we are hitting that full force with better means to diagnose, prevent, and treat the infections responsible.
Wonderful, great. Start off with, if we can, and you mentioned some of these already, what were the steps in the past that have led you to this point where you are actually contemplating deeper collaboration?
Well, I think that the JPIMR, when it started about 7-8 years ago, already from the beginning, one of the first steps was, of course, to develop a joint strategic research agenda. And in this work, of course, we looked over the Atlantic to see what is happening in the US and in the agencies responsible for the same questions there. I think already then there was a strong interaction between our countries in sort of developing the ideas for this research agenda, great input from the US and collaboration already there. And many of the scientists that are funded by European research agencies, of course, already have a strong scientific collaboration with scientists here in the US funded by US agencies. So it's two very sort of compatible sides to work together in this area, very natural, and there are a lot of collaborations already existing on the scientific level.
Specific examples? Maybe workshops where you were together or that you had chance meetings or side meetings?
I can take the historical approach and say that our first exposure to JPIMR came at the invitation of Mats Ulfendahl, who invited Francis Collins to send a representative to the, I think it was 2013 Brussels inaugural meeting that laid out the strategic plan or action plan of JPIMR. And so I was chosen to go and participate in that meeting and met the people. And so in keeping with the TATFAR, which I think really was instructive to me and to the US and engaging in this topic internationally, the mandate of TATFAR was better communication, collaboration, and coordination. It didn't require special funding. It didn't require new governing bodies. It was how do you communicate, collaborate, and cooperate around the topic of resistance and 3 specified types of resistance issues. And so that continued the collaboration, coordination, and networking, and having met Patrick and other colleagues in Mats at the first meeting, and when we had a specific need for addressing a particular resistance topic, we partnered with JPIMR and with TATFAR in a series of workshops in Stockholm in 2016. And these were jointly sponsored, and they specifically addressed resistance. There was a 2-day meeting that was around the basic research aspects. I think that's a little bit easier because basic research by its nature is international, and international scientists find each other through the publication and international meetings, and this sort of formalized that and encouraged 2 specific countries, Sweden and the United States, to see who has common interest, because the speakers on each side came with an interest and built from there. The other 2 meetings were, one, a grants meeting where the US NIH explained to Stockholm and to the Scandinavian countries, because this was open to all the other regional countries who joined in this, including in the program. And that's expanding your network. It's communicating, it's collaborating. And it told the world there what the requirements are for the NIH programs, which are most of them open to anyone anywhere in the world. And here's how our calls work. You can partner with your country people and ours and come in with grants and so forth and so on. The third one is the most interesting to me because it's ongoing. I'll wait to tell you more about that one, but I'll just say that to me, a key need in the drug pipeline is the last step, and that's access to patients to determine whether these drug candidates are safe and effective in helping to treat their infections. And for resistant infections, there is this oddity. Even though it's a huge problem and we tell everybody how many people are sick, there are not enough of them in one hospital to effectively enroll a trial without having a lot of hospitals where the next epidemic emerges. They're episodic and sporadic. And so that enigma makes it almost unapproachable for many companies to do trials there. So we had a specific meeting around how do we align resources with different countries who have the same needs so we can do together something we can't do by ourselves. And I presented one particular trial on colistin, used alone or in combination, where we were struggling to enroll it in the U.S. Rather than give up to failure, I put out a plea for European countries, and lo and behold, that led to a partnership with the Innovative Medicines Initiative. And I'll say more about that in the future, because when you ask what are we doing now, I'll share my excitement on how we were able to reach that goal. And we didn't have to join the JPI AMR. We didn't have to, because we have everything we need to do what we need to do. And that's knowing who you're going to call for a case-by-case example to work together as collaborators on a common problem.
And like Dennis was saying, this kind of meetings that we had in Stockholm led to real cooperation and collaboration among the scientists present, and it was not only Swedish and Nordic scientists, it was invited scientists for all of the JPIMR countries. And I think based on this model that we have started or developed together with the NIH, I also had meetings this week with the USDA, NIFA, and the CDC, and the same type of possibilities exist there in other research areas to try to find opportunities for the scientists that we're already funding, have them to go and meet and talk to each other, present their data, present their projects, and then I think we will see new collaborations where we might step in from each side and fund and strengthen this work later on also.
That's great. In fact, you had a bilateral meeting right before this workshop at 12 o'clock, if I'm not mistaken. This is breaking news.
It's called lunch.
You can call it whatever you may. Are there any concrete steps that you can share at this point from that, or we can branch out into future areas of collaboration, whether future workshops or future topics or future actions that you see as realistic?
Well, why don't I pick up on the example, and everybody was just dying to hear the conclusion to that. And so when we left that meeting in January in 2016 in Stockholm, I thought it was great to go there. I love seeing the shorter day and the cold weather, and just so happened to escape a 3-foot snowfall in the United States at that time. It was kind of ironic. But no one stepped forward at that meeting to say, we want to join the trial. We want to help Keith Kay. And Keith was there at the end of the day. And my colleague says, be a little bit more patient. You know, it takes a while for that to happen. Within 3 weeks, we heard from Keith Kay that there had been a call, and collaborators from the Innovative Medicines Initiative and Combact were interested in partnering. And within the space of a year, we went from an idea to site visiting potential sites. And in between that was our investigator, which is done so this is a standalone project. It's not really a network. It's a multi-center clinical trial. It's struggling to enroll. And the leadership of that sent a draft of the protocol and the patient criteria for enrollment to Combact, and they circulated it to a selective number of sites that they knew had experience with that particular set of infections. We went through a series of conference calls, weekly conference calls, identified a top tier of sites, sent our contractors over to site visit those sites, and we have already now, so that was within 1 year. We were reaching out to those sites. We've just funded the first countries, and already Israel, the first 2 sites are enrolling 5 subjects per month in each of those. We have 10 more, so we have 12 hospitals scattered throughout the Combact network. And if our enrollment continues the way it's headed now, we'll be done in a year and a half. And this was a trial that companies said you can't do it. And so that's exciting to me. I do hope we get there. Hope I haven't jinxed it by sharing the enthusiasm. And I see that the next idea, we don't know what it is yet. But when we know what it is, we'll know whom the logical partners are. We'll have our directory of people to call and can work together on the next problem, because of these global problems, we need partnerships, and they may be different for each particular case.
No, I agree, and I think even though both the JPAMR countries by themselves have quite a lot of power to sort of conduct this type of big trials, and the US has it as well, but in the end there will be so much need to do this and to expand these to include enough patients, so we have to work together in this area, and I think this is definitely one area where we will see more collaborations.
Great. At this time, I'd open it up to the audience for any questions that you might have.
Microphones.
I'm a consultant. To what extent are you able to conduct things over the internet and get consensus on the objectives and where the funding is coming from?
The project I described just required aligning a project in the United States with a project in the European Union, and that particular trial we funded. And the Combact just joined in conference calls over the internet too and email. And when we arrived at where we wanted to fund, they essentially became subcontractor sites under our contract. And so money just flowed through to the sites that were selected. So it was driven by partners that were found and criteria that were met through knowing where to call and whom to seek. And each case could be different. We didn't talk about basic science, but the first 2 days of the workshop has stimulated interactions with researchers who go on their own to decide if they want to write a grant and send that in together to our normal funding steps, or perhaps to those in the European Union on the other side.
And I think, I mean, in this type of collaborations like the joint programming initiatives with us, for in our case, 27 countries all over the globe, we have Japan to Argentina to South Africa and Egypt. Most of our meetings and connections between each other is through electronic means nowadays. It's very few physical meetings that is possible to organize this kind of membership.
Additional question?
Thanks. Hello. I was wondering, how have differing regulations in all of the partner countries, for instance, with a regulation of antibiotic treatment of livestock and the like, has that been at all a barrier to developing strategies and regulations and monitoring and any kind of thing that you do in your collaborations? Thanks.
Could you introduce yourself?
Oh, sorry. My name's Cato Sanford. I just started the National Academy of Sciences.
I think some of the challenges we encountered were, just as you mentioned, the regulatory differences between the United States and the European Union. In our clinical trial, we discovered two new things that we needed to do when we went into Europe that our contractor says, oh, here's the extra bills we're going to need to get those done. So just this week, I've had to go back to our directors and said, could we please have some additional resources, because we didn't know about the EMA rule for sponsoring the drug in Europe. Even though it's a licensed drug in this case, this trial, I should mention, is a public service type of a trial because there isn't an industrial sponsor for something that was developed in the 50s. And we're trying to optimize its use. So you don't just look for the best new and exciting new thing out there. How do you use best the drugs you have while you're ready to create new ones? And yet even that licensed drug needed a lot of regulatory coverage that we were not aware of, that wasn't just covered by filing to the regulatory agency. It required infrastructure that we had to pay for. And that is a challenge that we're working on right now.
I think when it concerns agriculture in Europe, a lot of that is under the same directives or legislations nowadays. But if you look at sort of Europe versus other countries, the different regulations and practices can also pose an advantage when it comes to research, because you have comparative sort of study objects to actually look at when you try to implement new prevention or intervention measures. So it's actually can be an advantage for the researchers to have access to different legal or practices in the different countries.
Additional questions?
Hi, my name is Heather Sipo. I'm with the George Washington University. And you speak about collaboration amongst nations and agencies and what have you, but for tackling an issue such as this, to what extent do you collaborate with across sectors? So working with pharmaceutical companies or other various stakeholders that might be working on the issue beyond just national borders? And what challenges have you encountered in terms of those additional collaborations? Thank you.
Well, the JPI's main mission is to support and coordinate the research part. And of course, that is not going to solve the whole problem of antimicrobial resistance. I mean, there are a lot of needs for policy uptake of the research results that can sort of change the picture. And we are working within the JPI. We have also ambitions to support the member states to improve policy uptake and sort of inclusion of other stakeholders or healthcare. But it's not our main mission, because obviously this is very often a national question which we can only support and facilitate and show on sort of best practices and experiences from countries, and then perhaps improve the work in the other member states. Yes.
And from the NIH side, we spend a lot of effort and time engaging the relative industries for bringing us ultimately better drugs, vaccines, and diagnostics, because no matter what research we do, we don't bottle and sell products. We come up with the science that informs the candidates that move forward. And this is a fragile area with antibacterial development because it's not clearly a money-making proposition. TATFAR has had an incentives committee that looks at the incentives that you fund through funding agencies that just push, and then there's a need for pull, what is like a market entry award, to lower the risk for companies to come into this area. On the push side, we have a number of preclinical services where we provide free services at every step of the drug manufacturing process or vaccine manufacturing process, whether it's screening in animals, whether it's pilot scale up of material for running in a trial, or whether it's helping to conduct the clinical trial, where we partner with small businesses, academic people, and even big pharma to encourage them to move forward into this area of critical public health need that doesn't have a lot of market incentive to it right now. And so it's a key thing where we try and influence their thinking by providing resources and incentives along those lines.
And the JPI is supporting research on new economical model or business models, or in health economy. How could we sort of facilitate more companies or give them incentives to actually do research and develop these new medicines that are necessary?
I think a key example is your European Innovative Medicines Initiative, which is the public-private partnership with bringing new products to market. And just another benefit that came out of the Stockholm meeting, that one event that just got people together. We also took our antibacterial resistance leadership group, clinical trial network leaders, over to that, where they met people from IMI. And they're just now joining the IMI trial for Staphylococcus and Pseudomonas on antibody approaches with the company. And so that came about by knowing people you hadn't met before and opportunities to help when enrollment needs a boost, to bring your centers forward and put our money in to the European money. It doesn't require a formal memorandum to do that. Is we can provide sites, we can enroll subjects, you let us see the protocol and tell us what we need to do to match your enrollment criteria. So that's a great way how you can, that's alignment of resources that comes from learning who your partners need to be to get where you want to go.
I think we have time for one quick question in the front here. Jonathan?
Hi, I'm still John White from the Consortium for Ocean Leadership. So a lot of people in this room, especially the ocean cult, know that the ocean is largely unexplored. We also are coming to believe more and more that it is unexplored, especially in terms of the development of medical treatments, antimicrobials. I just recently heard about a research effort looking at some newly discovered ocean-borne bacteria that produce chemicals that attack the hardened biofilms of harmful agents such as anthrax. Apparently nothing else can do it like these do, I don't know. But my question is, do you share the enthusiasm that we have for looking at the ocean as possibly the next panacea in terms of the actual development or discovery of antimicrobials and other medical benefits?
Yes, definitely. I think many of the national agencies that are part of the JPAMR are supporting projects like that, where you are harvesting the oceans for new bacteria, new resistance sort of combating mechanisms. So there is already funding in that area, although the JPI in itself have not yet have a consortium like that, but it will come, I'm sure.
And I can say I share your enthusiasm for that. I believe one of the projects that you may be referring to is in the program in my group, and that was, we didn't specify oceans, we specified what we needed, and then the community tells us how to get there, because it's a grassroots effort. We look for the brain power to solve the problem we pose, and that is we need alternatives to conventional antimicrobials. We can't just be making another generation of an existing chemical compound. And so that was looking at new sources of new natural products, in addition to looking at phage therapy, looking at the immune system in the host, looking at microbial ecology. And there was a project that had a special call for funding that looked at materials from sponges that have a way to prevent biofilms because they express molecules that control consortia of bacteria in the environment. So looking at these kinds of chemicals things may be useful in human treatment. So that came about through the opportunity to solve a problem with that particular source.
Wonderful, great. Speaking of the ocean, we're now going to move to the third panel, which is on oceans, marine, and climate. So thank you very much to Dennis and to Patrick. To emphasize the point that the ocean is a large place, this is our largest panel yet. We will start with introductions, and if you can please also give a quick little description of your purview, of your mission, or of your programs, that would be great. And then we'll start with the questions after that.
Thank you. So I'll kick off. You heard me earlier. Jackie Wood, the Acting Executive Director of the Joint Program Initiative for Oceans and Seas, JPI Oceans. I should say I'm here with my colleagues, Catherine Angel-Hansen, Strategic Director of JPI Oceans, and also with Uli Wolf, who's the German member, one of the German members from the Management Board for JPI Oceans. So don't feel you have to direct all the questions just to me. There's a escape valve there. Thank you. So the Joint Program Initiative on Oceans and Seas kicked off in 2011. We developed a strategic research agenda, and now we're really putting in place actions to take that forward. We're interested in the oceans and seas from the deep to the surface to the atmosphere, and from the further open oceans right up to the coasts and the impacts of the oceans on land. And this the sort of title and vision is around achieving healthy and productive oceans and seas and contributing to what we in Europe call the blue growth agenda, the economic opportunities that arise from our seas and oceans. And that in itself is extremely broad. In our research and innovation agenda, we have 10 strategic priority areas ranging across marine and maritime technologies, deep sea exploration activities, through to things like marine spatial planning. Where do we install how do we get the best use of our oceans? Where do we install wind turbines and all those sorts of things? And then right the way through, as has already been touched on, to the food security and marine biotechnology interests. A couple of illustrative examples just to give you a feel for that. We've been working very actively now with some projects on microplastics in the oceans. When these kicked off at the management board discussion level 4 or 5 years ago, wasn't really a topic. Now you can hardly move without hearing about microplastics. And we have four very successful projects going on, looking at how microplastics weather in the oceans, where they come from, how as a research community we can calibrate the measurements and exchange data that we use. On deep sea mining, ecological aspects of deep sea mining, which is also a political high priority issue. We are producing research work which is featuring in Nature and Science, and which is informing the codes being developed by the International Seabed Authority. So we try to build these science policy interfaces into our work as well. Both of those, by the way, I should say, have been mentioned by the G7 in statements that they've given. We're also interested in marine maritime technologies and sensors. We have a large 30 million programme currently running in collaboration with the European Commission through something called a ERANET co-fund on marine and maritime technologies. And later this year, we hope to put in place 35 million euro project around the blue bioeconomy as well. Really struck with some of the discussions we've had with colleagues in the last few days about how we present what the impacts of the oceans in the different agendas, that the impact of oceans into health, the impact for the economy, the environment, for energy security, food security and the like. And that's something I think we've already learnt. So that's a brief overview. I'll stop there for a second. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Rick Murray. I am the Division Director of Ocean Sciences at the National Science Foundation. The National Science Foundation's mission is to support basic science. And there's, of course, a continuum between basic science and applied science, or basic science with societal relevance. But the National Science Foundation really addresses as its fundamental orientation is basic science. Now, in the ocean arena, as it were, I'm responsible in my portfolio for basic science programs in chemical oceanography, biological oceanography, physical oceanography, marine geology and geophysics, ocean technology, ocean education, and then also on the infrastructure side, because like many of the fields that we've been discussing over the last several days, big science costs big money, and in the ocean world, small science, unfortunately, also costs big money. So I also oversee all the research vessels of the academic research fleet that are run by the academic institutions. We also oversee the Ocean Observatories Initiative, also the International Ocean Discovery Program of scientific drilling, and several other aspects. And one of the things that's very interesting about oceans overall is they're kind of the great international uniter. Of course, I'm biased in my view of loving everything about the oceans, but it's fundamentally an international field. I mean, many of the JPI orientations are, because science knows no boundary, bacteria knows no boundaries, and so on and so forth. And that's very true with the oceans as well. So we engage the international community through the scientific drilling program, for example, through CLIVAR, Climate Variability Program, and several other large-scale initiatives that require international engagement. It's not a luxury, it's a requirement. It is a big ocean, but it's a small planet, and we all live on it at this point in time. And so therefore, in order to address those large-scale, societally relevant questions, but from the basic science perspective that NSF enjoys and speaks to its mission, requires international engagement. And that's one of the reasons that we're here. And again, I thank you for the invitation. One last point I'll say before I turn over to Terry is we at the NSF, we engage very closely with our other federal agencies, in addition to NOAA, but also the Office of Naval Research, NASA, and a host of other agencies to a smaller extent. But the 4 N's, as we call ourselves, NSF, NOAA, NASA, and ONR, Office of Naval Research, we have a lot of collaborations as our different missions sort of fit together like a giant jigsaw puzzle. I'll turn over to the other jigsaw puzzle piece here, Terry.
Well, thank you. My name is Terry Schaefer. I work for the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration and primarily in the Office of Oceanic and Atmospheric Research, working on international collaboration, primarily in Europe and with the EU. But I'm also here on behalf of Craig McLean, the NOAA Assistant Administrator for Oceanic and Atmospheric Research and Acting Chief Scientist, and his apologies he could not be here today for this event. I want to talk a little bit at first about what NOAA is. I think there's some understanding, I think, across the audience here of what NOAA does and what it is, but I think its mission statement can kind of capture it in a real nutshell. And really what we're responsible for, our mission is to predict change in oceans, coasts, weather, and climate. So that's a very large mandate to predict these changes in the environment. And we do it on scales from tomorrow to decades to even longer time periods. And I think I like the way Craig McLean, the acting chief scientist, likes to coin our mission through 4 questions. How many fish are in the sea? We have to answer that on a regular basis. We're required to answer that. Secondly, what's the weather going to be tomorrow? What's the weather going to be in a year, in 10 years, in 1,000 years? Should we be building on shifting sands on our coastal regions? So if you look at these questions, and you can see they're reflected in the NOAA mission, but this is something that we have to do in NOAA every day. Now, I work on the part of NOAA that's focused primarily on research, and there's research that occurs across all of the NOAA line offices, but the largest share is in the Office of Oceanic and Atmospheric Research. And as Rick so aptly put it, oceans are global, and we can't really complete our mission without engaging international partners to help us to do the job of answering those 4 questions. And so I've had the pleasure of working with the European Union on the Galway Statement on Atlantic Ocean Cooperation between the United States, Canada, and the EU, and Craig McLean serves as the U.S. co-chair. And that's where I became aware of Horizon 2020, and that was a huge learning curve. And then the JPIs, and it's been a real pleasure since November when we had the meeting back in November 2016, and even before that in meetings with Jackie, to learn about the joint programming initiatives in oceans and to pursue this. And I'm really happy this meeting came to be. I want to thank Berna for her efforts in making this happen. Thank you.
Thanks. And you already know me. So I am the president and CEO of the Consortium for Ocean Leadership, or COL. And we are a nonprofit organization. We are a consortium of 95, as I count it today, ocean science and technology institutions, including academic institutions, industry, aquarium, and others that are involved in ocean science and technology, including a few international organizations. So one thing we do is that we are the non-governmental voice of ocean science and technology, and our biggest mission really is to shape the future of ocean science and technology and research in partnership with others, federal and otherwise. But we're not just a voice, we also have other means by which we convene the ocean science and technology communities around important issues. We provide, if you will, also the table by which you can lay the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle, because you can't put them together if you try to do it in your hands. So we provide a platform to convene around that. We also manage programs that are funded by federal agencies, programs that are funded by private institutions and by industry to, again, advance ocean science and technology, whether it's managing a major science program with multiple participants under the National Science Foundation or Navy, or it's convening around ocean observations, or some of the education programs, including a high school ocean quiz bowl competition called the National Ocean Sciences Bowl. So you can see that we really represent, because we are not government, we have special flexibility, and we are unique in our ability to really manage programs and to convene multiple ocean organizations to achieve the kind of results that we're now looking for and doing with the joint programming initiatives. And as we went through the day in previous meetings, the alignment of our priorities is clearly in much synergy and synchronicity, and we have great opportunities going forward. And I think it's important to have non-federal entities involved in this, as well as federal ones and government ones from international partners.
Great, wonderful. Actually, Jonathan, don't get too far away from the microphone. My first question is actually for you. Representing a non-governmental organization, what is your interest in seeing governmental agencies that fund research in the ocean and marine to collaborate? Why do you want them to collaborate?
Well, as a consortium, many of our institutions are either funded by or fund in partnership with the federal agencies, a lot of ocean research. And we all understand the importance of ocean science and the need for it, especially right now with things that are being talked about and that these three folks talked about. So going forward, really the importance of being able to have a non-governmental entity is to create the space in which you can bring people together in a non-threatening environment. You can have a voice that is not sort of, it's not controlled by governmental entities necessarily, but it's really an economy of scale as well. Because it's, and sometimes they say, you say that the ocean is really hard to model. You start with the hydrostatic equation, and how do you actually depart from that in time and space? It's really hard. The only thing harder than modeling the ocean is modeling the ocean agencies in the U.S. federal government, as Rick Murray alluded to. So if you come in as a JPI or another nation and want to figure out who do I partner with in the U.S. in order to really collaborate, you need organizations which can answer that question and help to solve that equation. That's the value of organizations like ours, to be able to provide the opportunities to do the good work that needs to be done for the reasons that we've talked about.
I would just add, it's certainly a nonlinear equation when you're dealing with agencies.
Just to comment on that?
Sure.
Yeah, I do think that's absolutely important, and because what we see, particularly in the ocean community, is we're very reliant on big infrastructures. We're reliant on long time series scientists who've been going out and looking for things for many years. A lot of that, although it's ultimately funded by the agencies, that expertise, the knowledge, and the infrastructures sit within the institutions. And in order to get a join up, we need to mobilize those, and so we need those links in to really make that happen. And that's where I think that's important.
Wonderful. This week, you have all had different chances to meet, not necessarily all together, but you are here together now. What are the topics of interest that you have found for collaboration?
Shall I start?
Well, it was interesting as we went through, we met on Monday, and we had a rather in-depth and long set of meetings on Monday at the Consortium for Ocean Leadership, and but very, very fruitful. We were lucky at NOAA. We had 13 representatives come from NOAA to participate at, representing 6 different thematic areas within NOAA and cross-line office, so not just purely in the Office of Oceanic Atmospheric Research where I work. And I don't know that we necessarily came to a decision on any joint activities at this point, but we certainly, I think it was very interesting to take a look at what Jackie presented about her strategic research activities or strategic areas as it relates to their strategic research and innovation agenda, and you look at NOAA's mission and goals and priorities. And I was kind of outlining kind of what we saw here, but if you take a look and do some cross-matching, you'll find that there's commonality in deep sea research, coastal and maritime planning, observing, modeling, and predicting ocean states, climate impacts on physical and biological ocean processes, ocean acidification impacts, food security. And there also, when I looked at that within the framework of the Galway Statement on Atlantic Ocean Cooperation, I once again saw a lot of synergy there for supporting that. So I was very pleased with that, and I think as we move forward, we'll be able to start to address this more in depth as we go back and begin to speak with the folks that were participated and also engage further in NOAA in further discussions. Thank you.
Thank you. If I could just add to that, I think we also look not only just looking at the where, but also the how. And while some of the agencies are not in a position to bring new money to the table for collaborations, new calls, I think there are lots of opportunities to collaborate in terms of sharing ship time and generally exchanging data and information on the oceans. And I think I'd also put it, Terry, in a more global context as well, because there are a lot of wider agendas out there, the sustainable goals, the 2030 goals, not just one on the oceans, but how oceans impact into health, into energy security, and the like. And also, we are very lucky now that the UN is designating an international 10-year ocean decade from 2021 to 2030. I know that's 9 years, but there you go. But already the planning for that is kicking off. So I think there are also opportunities for us to work together to inform the planning and the subsequent execution of that ocean decade, which has been really important for us all.
If I could follow up on this, if I may. In addition to the subjects that Terry in particular mentioned, I would also just like to point out a less quantitative, less specific feeling that I got or benefited from, namely one of reassurance, in the sense that many of the issues that we're looking at here in the United States from either our perspectives from one agency or another certainly overlap. And while choosing my words somewhat carefully, it is an interesting time to be a scientist, and a scientist whose lot of portfolio falls into the climate arena in this day and age. And so I found it very reassuring to, of course, I knew this intellectually, but hearing it and seeing it, it's very reassuring to see that other people care about these things and other countries care about these things as passionately as do we. And I was speaking with several people from the audience here earlier today, and I understand that they had very productive conversations yesterday at the U.S. State Department. And I just wanted to thank our colleagues from JPI for coming over here and helping reaffirm the centrality of science, of course, ocean science, the centrality of it to the human experience. And I think that's a very important point. And the diplomacy of science has historical successes, and we, of course, hope that there will be future successes in the diplomacy of science as well. So I know that's a subjective answer, but I also think it is a extremely important point to make, which is why we need to keep having these conversations. So when specific opportunities come forward or specific challenges come forward that might be very focused due to a storm or some incident going on, we all know each other and we know who to call, and we're not throwing business cards around the table for the first time meeting each other in a particularly acute, challenging time period. I would just like to say one more point, if I may, a little more specifically, in the sense of specific topics. Again, from National Science Foundation's perspective of basic science, we have a very active Office of International Science and Engineering, and Chuck Estabrook is here in the audience representing them. And we also have other directorates, such as engineering and the biologists who are engaged in this as well. But there is also strong overlap. If you just pick two of the things that Terry said, let's say deep sea mining, and let's say plastics. The National Science Foundation does not have any program specifically targeting those two areas, but we're very interested in ocean circulation, and that's how those plastics move around. And we're very interested in benthic ecology and establishing an environmental baseline. And so there's ample room for basic science research in these highly crystalline subject matters that are of very rich societal relevance.
We have time for one question from the audience. Okay, we're just on time for a break then, actually. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have another 3 panels. First one on water challenge, the second one on healthy diet for healthy life, the last one, climate challenge. So stay put. My name is Claire Chen, and I'm from NCURA, National Council of University Research Administrators. We also represented BILAT USA 4.0, who put today's workshop together. And you heard from my colleague Jessie Zito earlier. So without further ado, let's start the first panel. Dominique and Van Card.
So, hello everybody, I'm Dominique Darmondrel. I'm the Water Joint Programming Initiative Coordinator. So you heard about already 3. The 4th is about water challenges. So we are dealing with freshwater and transitional waters. So the 4% of the waters which are drinkable. So it's not really a new challenge. I was asked to give one of my quotes, and one of my favorite is from Benjamin Franklin, and he said that in wine there is wisdom. That's for after. In beer there is freedom, and in water there is bacteria. So as the others, we have a strategic research agenda. We are running a couple of activities like joint calls, coordinating project at the national level, connecting researchers and research communities, giving access to infrastructure. So that's the little bit what we are doing all around this freshwater and transitional, but we have also some activities in common with other JPIs. We started with FACE, because 70% of the water, of the fresh waters, are consumed for agriculture, forestry, or freshwaters, aquaculture. And we are planning some activities also with antimicrobial resistance and oceans on emerging pollutants, but I will come back to that later on.
I'm Venkat Lakshmi. I'm the program director at NSF for Hydrologic Sciences. And as you can see, this is the first time I'm doing this kind of a forum. So I mistakenly prepared a lot of slides. So you got to sit through slides. So I'll just go and advance it and just speak from there. I think I can speak loud enough. Okay, so so what I did was I tried to give a bit of the questions which we have in water. And this is not just specific to NSF. This is based on challenges and opportunities in hydrologic sciences. It's a National Academy report of 2012. It's a little dated. The website is down here below, and you can actually download this, this file. So if you look at it, there are 3 distinct areas of challenges and opportunities in hydrologic sciences. One of them is water cycle. The second is water and life, and then third is clean water for people and ecosystems. And I'll actually give you 2 examples, illustrated cartoon examples of it. So in the water cycle, if you look at it, some of the key words in this page are very important. Recharge, because we always talk about groundwater and how the world is running out of groundwater. And recharge is a very important aspect of groundwater dynamics and groundwater budgets, because one of the things which cannot be observed directly is groundwater. And I mean, you can dig wells and observe it, but it's very expensive. And the thing which cannot be observed at all is recharge. It's difficult to observe recharge, so you model recharge. The second thing is connections of water cycle to climate and land cover changes, and something which has gained a lot of attention and a lot of questions associated with this and the water cycle. With water and life, the big questions revolve around ecohydrology and how water cycle plays a big role in ecosystems. And lastly, clean water for people and ecosystems, the big question is on contaminant transport. So one of the most interesting things which has happened in the last, I would say 200 years, is construction of dams. And you can see United States, 1800 to 2000, and these are dots. Obviously, the dots are pretty large. It doesn't really signify the area doesn't signify the area of the dam, but you can see that the whole of the United States is covered with dams. And what happens is that the resulting globally with all these dams is the stored amounts of runoff. So there's a lot more storage of water. And storage of water means a lot of evaporation of water and losses of water as well. And also what it means is that diversion of water for hydropower or diversion of storage of water in the Aswan Dam or use for irrigation of crops all result in changes in downstream flow. And this downstream flow is pretty important for many other reasons. Now, if you look at Europe, and we're talking about JPI, so Europe, there's a lot of dams in Europe. And there are a lot of dams which are modifying the hydrological cycle in Europe. One of the biggest problems in the dam construction is, and a lot of people are focusing on it, lots of NGOs and the World Bank, is the lower Mekong and the Mekong River Basin. Lots of dams have already been constructed in China. There are dams being constructed in all over the place, in Laos, Thailand, Cambodia, etc. And in the next 50 years, the Mekong will have a different flow regime than it had 50 years ago. So if you think about it, Mekong will not be the same. And one of the important things in Mekong River Basin is that fine silt, the fine sediment which flows down and floods on the floodplains and helps grow all those crops. So that will be missing. The second one, which I said, another example was the arsenic contamination of groundwater. This is by natural erosion of minerals, pyrite minerals in the foothills of the Himalayas, and it comes down to Bangladesh, and it does not oxidize if there is no oxygen. But when the water dries up, when they pump water out of the tube wells, it results in oxidation and arsenic is liberated. And it has been a big problem in the last 30 years in Bangladesh of arsenic contamination. And so the Hydrologic Sciences program at NSF is one of the aspects, that's the one I'm a program director in, but we also do things with engineering. So the example of these projects are out here: groundwater, snow water equivalent, droughts and floods, ecosystem, wetlands, ecology, and ecohydrology and climate change, landslides, water allocation. One of the most interesting parts, connecting JPI water and JPI Fachi, is Infuse, and I did mention it in a question to the speakers. And Infuse is innovations in the nexus of food, energy, and water systems. And I'll just quickly go down to this last one and end my talk here. The issue of dams, which was brought up in the previous slides, actually has a big connection between Infuse and hydrology, because dams are built for for food, for irrigation, for agriculture, as well as for energy, hydropower, and they modify the water cycle. So you can think of these problems with dams as one of the reasons why, we will have a changing view of hydrology. And I'll stop here and answer questions.
Thank you, Venkat. And Dominique, out of all this rich information, could you maybe give us a few words or identify some common interest topic that you're interested in collaborating with National Science Foundation?
So that's for sure. Infuse is one of the hot topic for us. We have been discussing this a couple of times, and not only with the NSF. So I would like to mention that we discussed also this with USDA NIFR. And this morning we had a meeting with the State Department, and that was also something we discussed. It's even a little bit broader in terms of impact or potential impacts, because you can apply this in cities. And when you see the growing cities, that could be a very important issue. But we have also to deal with rural areas, with small communities, and this type of approach about the nexus and to have innovative solution for the different situation is really, really important for us. So this is definitely in the top, I would say 3 of the possibility to exchange with US, and if we have a couple of others, I must say. We also discuss emerging contaminants or pollutants. I never know which one you are using, because in Europe and in France we are making a difference between. But definitely this is also the top in the top 3. And most probably the other will be something about the Earth observation connecting to the local measurements. We have a lot of data there for reporting on food security or to report on the water basin quality and how to deal with this data, how to connect with some information coming from the citizens with the new apps, or everybody wants to report back, how we can make this feasible and collect even more data, but get the better use of this. That will be, I would say, the three. And those topics are quite similar from different agencies we met during this week.
And for National Science Foundation for Vanguard, I have a very, I guess it's a little tricky question. I know you might have already had some international collaboration with other countries and other programs. Out of all these existing programs, what would you say to all the JPIs here? What's a lesson learned out of the international collaboration you already had?
So one of the very interesting international collaborations which is currently ongoing is the engineering directorate runs a competition with the NSF China. And this year's theme of the competition is innovations in food, energy, and water. And we currently are actually in the process of reviewing proposals. Actually, we're going to start in a few weeks. So I cannot tell how surprised some of us were when we saw so much interest between in both the United States and China on these in these proposals, because it was even more difficult because a PI in United States had to have a PI partner in China, and they had to submit the same or similar proposal to their agencies, and so they're jointly reviewed, and only the top ones. You have to rank top, and both of them have to can be funded. So I can see that in the case of water or food, energy, and water, there is a lot of interest globally, and this could also translate into something we could do with JPI.
Good, thank you. And so the one last question from me, and then we will open the floor up to the audience, is what's next? How do you envision the collaboration with JPI Water?
So one of the very interesting things we discovered in our meetings yesterday was that the 2019 call, which Dominique is working on, we may be able to get in the ground floor in some of their planning meetings. And secondly, the JPI Water was very happy to learn about two programs which NSF runs. One is RAPID, which is giving funding for quick collection of data, like when you have a flood and you want to collect the high water marks or where the sediments have been deposited, data which will be lost after a few days. This is RAPID proposals, which are not large amounts of money, but enough to carry out the observations. And the second one is how the career proposals or how career for young investigators is funded. So these are some of the areas where we are thinking of collaborating.
And Dominique, anything to follow up?
Yeah, just to precise, probably the topic of the call we were mentioning. This is the one on emerging pollutants, which will cross across sectors, but also different from marine to freshwater environments. So for us, it's a huge topic, and that has been already raised during the previous discussion. I'm guessing you heard that several times. So that will be very nice if we can have the Americans on board on that part, definitely. What Venkat said about RAPID, this quick emergency response, this is something we have been trying to do there, and we didn't succeed so far. So I'm guessing we will learn a lot about how to do that. About career, that's also something very important. In Europe, we were thinking about having calls for young researchers to promote this and to enlarge a little bit their contribution to to science and innovation. So that's, I think, something that we can also work on that part. We would like also to work on what we call a knowledge hub, which is here, RCN. I'm also learning in the learning phase with all your acronyms. So these research collaboration coordination network. You see, I'm not that good. I think we have one starting on emerging pollutants right now, meeting for the first time, the seed group meeting in two months. And we were exchanging with several of you, several agencies, on how we could connect networks of American researchers on that part. And I'm guessing that will be of interest for other JPIs also. So that's something we will try to develop in the future, in the, I would say, short future. We do hope on that part.
Thank you. And I can already see two of you are sitting so close together. So we will see the collaboration happening tomorrow. So without any delay, I want to open up the floor for the audience. If there's any questions.
Chuck.
Chuck Estabrook, National Science Foundation. This is more of just a comment. I think the concept of the JPIs is I think other agencies have known about JPIs for a while, but at NSF, it's kind of we're just now coming on board with this, and I think that this could be a very good mechanism for collaboration with Europe. Because right now, many investigators are confused when it comes to how do you collaborate with Europe? Do you just do it one country at a time? But this is a mechanism where you can do lots of countries at once. And I think that this is a very good way forward.
Yeah, with this you can work with 22 full members, 3 observers, 5 Beyond Europe associate partners. Just to mention, we have a new full member coming from South Africa. So you see, we are no longer fully European. So it's really working beyond Europe or the European Union. We have at least now 5 members from outside the EU. So, and this is because the water challenges are global. So same priorities in all the countries.
One last question. This gentleman in the front. Oh, we will take 2 questions. Yeah.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Hello, my name is Beta Day. I'm from the State Department. I just had a quick question, I guess, echoing the initial question that was made during the food security panel of with issues of water, obviously there are certain political components to it or that complex problems that add to that. In JPI, is it within your mandate to work on those issues? And if so, could you expand on that? And if not, then...
Yeah, so as the others, we have we developed and we are also on an ongoing process for revising our strategy, research and innovation agenda, and this is a quite open process. We are working with our boards. As Jackie mentioned, we have advisory boards, scientific or stakeholders, but we also run some public consultation, totally open. So now we have also to work on the answers and what they are providing. And we are trying to integrate as much as possible all the new issues or even the comments on we didn't enough like this or this. There was, for example, we had a lot of comments from South Africa, but other countries saying, well, when you are reading our strategic research agenda, it looks very European or developed country. And you should think about having some chapters about what's going on in the developing countries or less developed. And so we are in this process, and we will use our new members, for being able to do that. So a couple of new issues are coming. Science diplomacy, for example, was one of the topics they would like to include. Nevertheless, our strategic research agenda is shared with others. We are not implementing everything. So we're also trying to push others to take on board some of the issues. So not only the European Commission, but some other partners. It could be foundations. It could be other type of, research funders. So that's the way we are proceeding at the moment.
So I just wanted to add one thing to it. So even in United States, there's always I won't call it water wars, but water disagreements. The recent one was between the state of Georgia and Alabama and Florida. I mean, I'm sure you have read it in the newspaper. So these are only going to become more when you have less water. So even though we're not different countries, but you have these issues even in the United States.
And there's one last question on the gentleman.
I'm Bob Hershey. I'm a consultant. To what extent are you able to use the internet to have your meetings and get together funding for projects and get together the data so people know what they're getting from the joint effort?
So that's for me. Well, I would say I'm working with internet all the time. You cannot connect with almost 30 countries with traveling all the time. So we are connecting like this. We are even using webinars for some of our calls to explain the calls. We did a training with scientists on one side, PIs and innovators. That was not that successful. That's one thing. The second part for you, it's the question I mentioned before about the big data. One of the key elements at the moment and the key discussion with some of our stakeholders are how we could integrate citizens' data, so using apps, in our networks, observatories, and infrastructure. And how we combine those different data. We are validating them. We are integrating them in some modeling, in decision making. So that's one key issue. The point we are discussing at the moment with not only the European Commission, but also some of our, I would say, enterprises, public and private, because the water sector is balanced between the private sector and the public, is that it's of most interest for them. So this one was one of the topic they raised, and so we are trying to see if we could partner in a way or another on that point. For the moment, the JPIs are public partnership, and we have to deal with some specific rules in Europe and in our agency, so we have to cope with this before moving forward. But I can develop then later on if you want. This is about state aid.
So in addition to webinars, which Dominique already mentioned, sometimes panels at NSF are also virtual, so you can participate in it through the internet. So there is a considerable use of this in our work.
Definitely.
And thank you. I think, Dominique, would you like to share one more quote for the audience?
I was asked, that's, so we are moving to another country. And the last one is from Nelson Mandela. Access to water is a common goal, essential to the social, economic, and political affairs of the country, the African continent, and the world. It should be a lead sector for cooperation for world development. It always seems impossible until it's done. So welcome on board.
Thank you. So we're moving on to the panel, next panel, panel 5, Healthy Diet for Healthy Life. We have Jolene from JPI HDLI and Deidre from USDA. Would you like to give the audience a short pitch of yourself and the program?
Yes, thank you very much. I'm Jolien Wenink. I work for the Netherlands Organization of Health Research and Development, and I'm the coordinator of the Joint Program Initiative Healthy Diet for Healthy Life. And we deal with the societal challenge that relates to food, nutrition, and health. Over 2 billion people in this world are overweight, and this amount is increasing rapidly. And the associated costs with this are over $1.2 trillion per year globally. And science has delivered us valuable insight in the role that food and nutrition plays towards health, how it can play a role in increasing the risk of early onset of many diseases, how it can play a role to live your life with a chronic disease in a better way, and even in some cases like diabetes too, how nutrition can play a role to cure that disease. Though there are many crucial knowledge gaps that are still there and that need to be tackled to contribute towards a solution for this societal challenge. And that's where JPI HDL focuses on. And examples here from this are the interplay between biological, sociological, and psychological factors in relation to nutrition behavior, and how to come towards a more personalized approach, changing behavior from consumers. And besides the fact that people are overweight, a diet that people consume is also unsustainable if you look towards climate change, which will be the next panel, and also if you look to what the Earth has to offer, at least with the current technologies that are there. So that's something that we look into. We work currently together with 26 countries, of which 22 are full member states. And Canada already joined us a couple of years ago and is a very appreciated partner of our JPI through the Canadian Institute of Health Research. And a bit more recently, New Zealand also joined our group. So we're already quite working towards a more global approach. And one of the important things that we deal with besides funding international calls is also to help to look how to increase the impact of research also on a national level, and how to bridge both on the policy side, the agriculture and the health, as well as how to bridge on the scientific side, how to bring together these worlds of scientists and to focus on more an interdisciplinarity approach which we need to solve this solution.
In Deirdre.
Hi, I'm Deirdre Chester, and I'm from the United States Department of Agriculture, the National Institute of Food and Agriculture. So my colleague Otto talked a little bit about NIFA, and I am actually in the Institute of Food Safety and Nutrition in the Division of Nutrition. NIFA's mission is to invest in and advance agricultural research, education, and extension to solve societal challenges. And so within NIFA, we have a flagship competitive research program, which is the Agriculture and Food Research Initiative. I have the honor of being the national program leader that leads both programs in both foundational, which is our basic research program, and our AFRI Childhood Obesity Prevention Program, which is our applied nutrition program. And so we look at challenges of childhood obesity, access to safe, affordable, and nutritious food, and also global food security and fighting hunger. But on the foundational side, we also support research in the microbiome. I am also involved in a joint program with the National Institutes of Health with NIDDK, which is the food-specific profiles and biomarkers of health. Myself, along with colleagues from the National Cancer Institute, NIDDK, and some other institutes came together about 3 years ago to support research in this area. It really came out of the foundational program that I provided leadership for, being capped at $500,000 for 4 years. And so that was an opportunity for us to really leverage funds so that we can fund projects at a higher price point. And so Jolene and I met in September. I went to Brussels to participate in the JPI HDHL meeting to really look at how we could fund some projects together. And so we have ongoing talks, and so we hope that in the near future, our next RFA cycle, where it could be possible, is in FY 2019.
So during the discussion you had last year, or 2016 and this time, what are some of the common interest research topics that you would like to share with everyone?
So I think the main common interest or research topic that we have is the microbiome. We looked at their portfolio and also our portfolio, and it's really an area where we're both funding. So we looked at it as an opportunity. One of the things that's interesting about USDA NIFA is that we can only fund domestic research. But about 2 years ago, it was placed in our RFAs that we are supposed to encourage and foster international collaboration. So we really have to come up with creative ways to do that. And so one of the ways is just making sure that we partner with organizations outside of the U.S. so that we can fund the domestic part of that research, and then they could fund the international side of that research. So, Jolene?
Yeah, maybe in addition, the National Nutrition Research Roadmap of the USA, which also includes the interest of the USDA as well as NIH and many other institutes, really connects well with the strategic research agenda of JPI HDHL. And time-wise, it's interesting that both the USDA is currently developing their strategic plan for the upcoming 5 years around nutrition, the nutrition topic. And JPI HTHL is in the process to work towards its next implementation plan, 2019-2021. So by keeping in touch and developing these strategic plans in parallel, we can see if we can tune the timing in a way that collaboration will be more fruitful and efficient. So, yes.
And from your perspective, Julian, coming from Europe, what's the importance do you see in collaborating with U.S. partners, especially in this topic?
In the topic of the microbiome, well, the microbiome is an emerging topic. It's quite a novel field with a lot of technological development, which is a good thing, but which makes it also very difficult to combine and to compare different research studies of the past, because the technology changes and the way research is performed changes. And we are quite far away from really determining how diet influence health through the microbiome. It's a very complex issue. And to speed up that process, it's important that now that the intestinal microbiome research field becomes at the next level, to see how we can connect and make sure that the methodologies are more standardized so that we can repeat and compare and get the evidence that we need.
And from the U.S. perspective, what's the benefit of working with a European partner?
So I think our benefit is that oftentimes we fund researchers and they will ask us if there are partners outside of the U.S. that they can partner with. You know, they say you put this nice sentence in your RFA and you didn't really give us any information as to who's doing that type of work. So I think for us, it really answers the question that we have been mandated to say, put this international piece in all of our RFAs, to now do the second step and say, we actually know exactly who is doing research in your area. And the nice thing is that if we can figure out how to co-fund these, we can also go a step further and say, we already know that we'll fund this part of it, they will fund these objectives. And I think for us, the way that we look at that, we often leverage funds. I talk about the NIH program. That is such a large program, or a price point of a large program, because we were able to leverage funds together. So it means that researchers can do more whenever they are attempting these research studies in biomarkers. And so I envision that these researchers will also be able to do more. And we actually would have the information for them to tell them exactly who's doing the research.
A win-win situation for both
Yes.
sides. So now the $1,000,000 question for every single panel today. What's next? How do you envision this collaboration happening?
Well, we have invited the USDA to attend our management board meeting either in March or in June to think along in our discussion for our implementation plan, so that we can tune better in the future. And we also talked about some concrete actions around a workshop on biomarkers in September 2018, as well as to look towards the conference of the ASN, the American Society of Nutrition, in 2019.
Yes. And so I will say from our side, the nice thing is that I'm on the planning committee of that biomarkers workshop that we're having in September. And so it really means just making sure that we make that connection. Another nice thing is that I have a really good relationship with ASN. We have often had our project directors meeting at ASN every year for our grantees. So I think that it will be relatively easy to develop a workshop between NIH, JPI, and USDA. As far as my NIH colleagues, we talk often. We are in communication at all times looking at the research. And so it seems like a very easy fit. One of the things that we have to do at USDA, just another, it's a small step. You know, currently, the way that we're able to co-fund research with even NSF, NIH, is that we have to enter into a memorandum of understanding. And so it means that our administrators at USDA NIFA have to say, yes, it's okay. And so that is the easy part, because I think the convincing them that this is really going to get us more bang for our buck is the easy part. And so I think that once we're able to enter into to an MOU, then we can actually hit the ground running, because we have been communicating over the last couple of months, and I have been in attendance at those meetings.
Great, thank you so much. So I want to open up the floor to our audience. Do we have any question for this panel? So if there's no question, I want to ask sort of my own question to both of you. What do you see can become or potentially becoming the biggest obstacle between this partnership?
I think that the only obstacle that we have with USDA is that we do have a mandate that we fund domestic research. And so, but to me, that's not a huge obstacle, because, you know, it's almost like whenever we put that information in the RFA, everyone called us. They said, oh, so now you're funding international research. And we were like, not exactly. And they're like, okay. And so that means that we have to explain it to them. So I think what it means is that is potentially the obstacle, but I don't think it's a big obstacle that we can't navigate it. We have started the negotiation processes of navigating that, in figuring out how can we put JPI more pronounced in our RFAs, and just saying that, you know, these are the partners. Bring us research, and we're willing to fund that. So I would say that that's probably the only obstacle, but I'm also a glass half full kind of girl.
Yeah, it's not in my nature to think in obstacles. Sometimes things will not go as quick as you want. But I think it's always the case to look towards solutions, especially if you are in an initiatives with 26 countries. I think that's the way forward, and if you deal with society challenges.
Yes.
Thank you. Oh, so
Thank you very much. Just a quick comment, because you were from Caroline Lesser, I'm from JPI.
Okay.
Thanks a lot for. Oh, thanks. I just wanted to clarify something, because you said we can only pay for our own researchers, but in fact, just for your information, when we, within our respective JPIs, set up joint activities, very often our members only pay for their own researchers. So just to clarify, we don't necessarily function with what we call in our jargon a real common pot, where all the money is put together and then we pay for whoever. No, very often we also have the same logic. Yes. So, and it hasn't been an obstacle for collaboration. So just to clarify, thank you.
Thank you.
So now we move on to the big topic, climate. I feel like climate can stretch out to 2 days workshop, but we will try to condense everything in 25 minutes. So, Frank, would you like to start to give an overview of JPI climate and yourself?
Yes, thank you very much, Claire. I'm Frank McGovern. I am the chair of JPI Climate, a role I've recently taken up, so I'm still learning in mode. But it's great to be here, delighted to have such a welcome here in Washington, and thanks to all the people and agencies who took time out generously to meet us over the last number of days. I chair JPI Climate. It's one of the newer JPIs. It's only 7 years old, so we're still in the kindergarten stage, I guess, in terms of getting our structures and processes together. Our tagline is connecting climate knowledge for Europe. So you can see we've started off very much focused on Europe, but we're moving, obviously this meeting testifies that we're moving to a more international arena, and we also have projects to bring the knowledge that we're generating for Europe, because we feel that knowledge is of benefit globally outside of Europe as well. So currently we have 17 member countries, most of them EU countries, but also non-EU countries such as Norway, and we have 4 associate countries. To date, we've managed to mobilize about 100 million euro in funding for 40 research projects. Key areas, I suppose the flagship projects that we focused on has been on climate services. And by that we mean bringing knowledge from academia, from the research fora into practical use at various levels. And those climate services are focused, I guess, in the sectors such as energy, agriculture and water, as we've been hearing earlier on. We're also looking at developing more expert systems for looking at extreme events and providing alert systems. And then finally, one of the key issues is bringing knowledge to people, so enabling people to develop their adaptation plans and strategies and also to implement those.
And Jack, would you like to start?
Yeah, I'm Jack Hay. I work at NASA. I'm the Associate Director for Research in the Earth Science Division, but I'm really here today primarily on behalf of the U.S. Global Change Research Program. The USGCRP, it's a coalition of 13 federal agencies involved in global change research. It's, you know, what the name says. It's been around for well over 25 years. It was the Global Change Research Act of 1990 that created the organization. The 13 federal agencies are, I think in terms of the budget cross-cut, it's about $2.6 billion per year, I think that's spent. And the two main functions of the USGCRP is one is sort of the coordination of efforts among the federal agencies, because the GCRP doesn't have its own budget other than what it takes to run the office that does the coordination. The budget resides within the agencies, but it serves as a place to coordinate, help us look at sort of priorities and interdependencies. But then there's also some statutory requirements that the GCRP has in terms of producing products. And so an annual report that we call our Changing Planet, triennial updated strategic plan, a quadrennial national climate assessment, and 10-year strategic plan. So the current strategic plan for the USGCRP has 4 foci: advance science, inform decisions, conduct sustained assessment, and communicate and educate. And conducts sustained assessment includes the national climate assessment that I mentioned, and the 4th NCA is sort of very, far along. I think today is the deadline for public comments on that. And I think in the course of the work that the GCRP does, especially on the advanced science part, it's I think the idea of sort of policy relevant but policy neutral science that can especially inform decisions without necessarily being oriented towards any particular set of decisions, but being able to help choices. So I'll primarily speak as a USGCRP person, but a little bit at NASA. NASA's Earth Science program has 4 components. There's the flight part, which builds and operates satellites, the research part, which is the part that I run. There's an applied sciences part that really looks to connect the results of the flight and the research program and to build partnerships with users so that information can really be put into helping other entities, especially operational ones, improve their products and services and better serve the citizens of the U.S. and the world, and a technology program that serves to advance the technology so that in the future we may be able to do better things or more cost-effective things, and measurements are a big part of what we do. So.
Thank you,
that's enough
Jack.
for now.
Yeah, and I think the next question might be more towards Frank, but feel free to chime in. Why was climate selected as one of the 10 societal challenges in JPI in Europe? I know some of us probably don't need the persuasion, but maybe some do.
Okay, thanks, Claire. I think for Europe, climate has always been has been a major issue for Europe for quite some time at this point. The reasons for that, I guess, are multiple, and really we don't have enough time to go through all of those. But I think most people will be aware that many of the major cities of Europe are threatened by climate-related issues. They're on the sea, Dublin, London, others in Europe. Much of the population of the Netherlands, for instance, is living below sea level. Europe has experienced considerable damage and loss of lives due to intense extreme weather events, including heat waves. So there are very practical reasons why we want to address this issue and address it now. We want to better understand the vulnerabilities of our infrastructures, of our ecosystems, and of our people, of course. We want to inform responses to this challenge, and overall we want to increase the resilience of our homes and the countries and localities that we live in.
Thank you, Frank. And Jack, would you like to add why is it important to do research in climate?
Yeah, well, certainly from the point of view of the U.S. GCRP, among other things, it's the law. As I said, that there's a Global Change Research Act of 1990, and that's survived through all the administrations when you look at climate, global change, climate's a big part of it. There's other aspects, land cover, land use change. I think when we use the term climate, we tend to sort of take the sort of climate broadly construed. So it's, some people hear climate and they think physical climate, but we're really interested, what's the physics of the Earth system? What's the chemistry and biogeochemistry of the Earth system? What's the biology? And to understand the processes and the feedbacks, and to understand both, what's naturally occurring and what's human induced, and because that environment, and whether it's the climate broadly construed or from a global change point of view, that's the context in which we all live and work and plan for the future. And we know that things are changing. They're changing naturally. They're changing as a result of human activity, and it's got short-term impacts. It's got long-term impacts, and the forcings are global, and the impacts are global. So it's important that when we think about it, we look at it as a global system and engage with others who are addressing a lot of the same challenges that we are.
And within those climate challenges you mentioned, which area do you identify together that could be a common interest?
That's for me, is it? Well, I think Jack has actually said a lot of the issues there. I mean, fundamentally, we need to increase our knowledge about the Earth and how it works. We have to improve our understanding of systems and processes, including human systems and the Earth systems. So those are our key shared objectives. Key uncertainties exist across all of this, I suppose, as I said, from the fundamental sciences to the solution space, and that's a very broad spectrum. It's a major challenge to address all of these. So working together, I think we can assist each other. There are emerging issues. I think one of the things I've learned here, at least, is you're interested in health and safety aspects. And this is an emerging issue, which I think we can usefully work together in. So there are many shared interests, and we can, I think, work together. And really, it's important that we have global networks that can actually communicate. The human dimension of all of this is very important. So meeting people across the table, being able to share views, share what the challenges are, has been very useful here. And I suppose if I want to be very specific, I think, we are both sides of the Atlantic Ocean. We have a shared interest in what's happening to that ocean. There are key vulnerabilities in the region. The ocean cycles, the cryosphere, the major ice sheets, and the atmosphere above the ocean is shared. So we can, I think, develop strategic observational capacity. We can also develop shared modeling capacity, and working together we can help, through cooperation, better understand the natural variability and how we as humans are influencing that.
Working together, indeed. So in the past few days during your meetings, would you like to share with us some of the key findings or the conclusion of the meetings you had together?
I'll start. And I think, in some sense, not surprisingly, we're thinking about a lot of the same things. You know, there may be some, particular wrinkles that may be different, but if I think about, some of the subjects that we talked about earlier, and it won't be an exhaustive list, but the idea of, trying to do better forecasts for subseasonal to seasonal, getting at timescales that may be shorter than the climate timescales that people really looked at, but are longer than the weather timescales, because those are very germane to decisions that people have to make. Looking at extreme events, which tend to have a disproportionate impact on the way people live their lives, and we know that as climate changes, a small change in means may correspond to a very large change in extremes, and understanding what those, how those distributions of extremes may change. In situ observations is something that that we all work on, and especially in a lot of the parts of the world that are changing rapidly, are vulnerable, and not so easy to work in. So, the extent to which we can, work together, and, we're facing some of the same challenges, and, let's not chase the same partners. Let's find a way to learn lessons from each other. And then something else is in the area of capacity building. I mean, again, I think it's a similar kind of thing, that a lot of global change is taking place in areas that don't have a lot of, physical infrastructure, don't have a lot of, well-established observing systems, don't have the educational systems that can really support and nurture people working at high levels. So finding ways to build and identify and really nurture the partnerships that we have can sustain, so that we can all benefit from each other. So that's something that we're all looking to do, and I think to the extent that we can talk to each other, leverage a lot of the other mechanisms that are already there, and figure out in some cases what's the best of the multiple mechanisms that are out there for us to support this kind of collaboration, and then make it happen.
Yeah, I agree with almost everything that you said there, Jack. I think it was really, for me, it was great to have a reaffirmation of the many shared interests and goals that we have, and see that we are looking in the same areas for solutions. So that in itself was very exciting in a sense, and then the potential links that we can see. I suppose you asked about obstacles. I think one of the things is expectations can get raised, and these things take time to move on. And so I think we have to be very practical about this. Also, I suppose one of the things that we gain from these meetings is insights about the complexity of structures and systems that exist on both sides of the Atlantic. I mean, Europe is quite impenetrable for many of you sitting in the audience here, including those people from Europe. And so it's good to be able to come to a venue like this and try to explain it, because it helps us think about how it actually works. And we see the same, even though the US is more homogenous, there is a complexity here which is also quite impenetrable for us. We don't need to know all about it, but it's good to work with people who know all about it here. And I think once we can know I suppose some of the nuance, we can hope to work constructively within these systems, while obviously respecting their integrity and the differences that are between us. But I think that's a useful development in itself. So yeah, I think there's a lot of ways forward, and hopefully we will be able to take some of the ideas forward together.
Thank you.
Can I
Yeah.
add a little bit? That I think that there's complexity on both sides, and I think that this discussion can help us begin to recognize that and figure out how to navigate it. I mean, on the U.S. side, we're 13 agencies, and there are times, quite frankly, that you wonder whether we work for the same government. So among other things, I hope that building off of this conversation, for now European friends, that they don't have to invest as much time and energy into trying to figure that out, because through USGCRP, and especially Apurva Dave, who's our international coordinator, you may want to raise your hand. And he becomes somebody who, understands, all of us and what makes us tick and how we operate differently. So, he can become a resource. And I think, for a lot of us in the U.S., we have a lot of familiarity with other coordination mechanisms. Certainly on the NASA side, a lot of our stuff is through the observational world. So, we have very strong relationships through the Committee on Earth Observation Satellites, the Coordination Group on Meteorological Satellites, through the World Meteorological Organization Expert Team on Satellite Systems. So we have a lot of coordinations already, and I think we have a lot of them more at the working level with the scientists through things like the World Climate Research Program. I mean, just this week, Monday, I was at the science steering group for the GWEX program, which is one of the core projects of the World Climate Research Program, and hearing about all their individual projects, and seeing the at that level, there's a lot of close coordination between American scientists and European scientists, as well as those from around the world. But I think the ability for us to have a way to interact with sort of the research programs in the European countries individually and collectively is something that we that at least some of us haven't had. I think certainly at NASA we share some of the same challenges. We don't fund research outside the United States, but say when people write proposals to us, if somebody is addressing a global issue and they have a collaborator who may, benefit from funding through a JPI, and they can say, we have this collaborator that you don't have to pay for, and, that may help make their proposal stronger. So, I think it's going to take us a while to figure out exactly how to, to do this, but I think, having another coordination mechanism, which, I think if it can help Europe figure out the U.S., which is certainly not easy, and I think help us figure out how to work with various subsets of European countries, it can only be a good thing.
I think so too. And you talk about all these ideas and maybe future collaboration. I don't want to pressure you, but other JPIs and federal agencies have mentioned maybe joint workshop, joint activity. Have you planned something that you want to do together next?
Well, I want to ask Berna to get a bigger, better CSA so that we do this again. I've only joined at the end since I've only become chair of JPI recently, so I'm not catching all of the benefits of this, so I think that's an urgent task. No, but more seriously, I think we have identified a number of areas which we can work on. We'll have to do some homework. We'll have to look at what we're doing back at home, and I think there's some homework to be done here as well to think about all of these issues. We have identified concrete areas which I think we can share some documents with each other in the near future. And yes, we will be using the internet, I think, to communicate with each other, just to preempt that particular question. So I think there are within the horizon some tangible areas that we can work together. And I mean, Jack was mentioning to me that he has funded people at Mace Head, which is on the west coast of Ireland in Galway, and obviously Galway has been mentioned here a few times as well, and Jack is one of the few people here, I'd say, that knows that those measurements were started in Adrogyle by James Lovelock, who worked with NASA before he went back to the UK. So there is a very fluid scientific community working between the US and Europe, and so there's a lot of foundations there that I think we can build very effectively on for the future.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that the real challenge in some sense is, we now, I think for a lot of us, we weren't familiar with JPI in general or JPI in climate, so now we are, and I think, in the midst of all the other coordination mechanisms that we have, and I think now there's a new one, so to figure out, what are the right things to bring to utilize this coordination mechanism for, and what are the ones that we look at it and say we have other ones and those are just fine. And, I think we don't want to, do anything that will interfere with the stuff that we have that's already working. And I mean, in general, I think there's, the interactions that we have are positive, the mechanisms are effective, but, if I look more broadly, from my perspective, the challenges of climate and global change are greater than any of us individually. And the only real shot we have at maximizing both the advancement of the science and the application of that science for, improved products and services that will benefit, people everywhere on Earth. It's us working together. So I welcome additional opportunities for that.
Thank you. Thank you for that very, very optimistic remark. And we look forward to seeing how this collaboration will blossom in the future. Could we maybe we have time for one question from the audience?
Thank you. I'm Julie Jordan from Mississippi State University, and I think you actually tried to answer my question around the complexity of how to collaborate. And we're talking and so may be more of a comment, but we're talking at a high level here. And I would encourage perhaps ways of understanding how the barriers to collaboration are actually playing out at the institutional levels across our countries, and maybe foster conversations more like this at the institutional level, and maybe find solutions oftentimes to the science or with the scientists. Maybe some of the solutions to collaborations are actually found, within the institutions if we can have a conversation.
Yes, well, that's absolutely true. I mean, it's not about us sitting up here. It's really about getting the research community, the people working at the coalface in terms of doing the active research together and enabling that. And there are mechanisms that we can explore for doing that better than we are currently. But yeah, point well made and well taken. Yeah.
Would you like to add a final remark?
No, I think that we certainly try to enable things where we can. There's certain restrictions that, especially at NASA, that we have about not being able to, fund researchers outside the country. But in some cases, trying to nurture partnerships. I mean, like I'll give one example of something that we did that really was done over a period of time was the Northern Eurasia Environmental Science Partnership Initiative. It really came out of our land cover land use change program, which we funded a lot of people using Landsat and other data, but looking in the Northern Eurasia area, and they reached out to people in Eastern Europe, people in the former Soviet Union, and really were able to do a lot of work by harnessing local activities. That was that sort of wrapped up, and now they're doing a similar kind of thing, a Southeast Asia initiative. And when that program solicits, sometimes there'll be sort of regional kind of things. So for a while they did a lot for to encourage research and collaboration in Northern Eurasia. Now it's sort of South and Southeast Asia. They did a special part on the Caucasus, and just as one example, the program did a lot of the people associated with the program did a book on looking at land cover land use change in the sort of former Soviet Union and Eastern Europe after the fall of the Soviet Union, when you had some significant changes to the political structure, which changed the way people interacted with the surface. Subsidized agriculture wasn't subsidized. People moved off the land, and you can see it in night lights. You could see it in you could see it in the vegetation indices from the satellites, and you look at the book that came out of it, and you see a mix of authors from U.S. universities, from national entities in Europe, universities in Europe. And I think it was because over a period of time that project was built up. It was, I think, tied in with GOFC Gold and IGBP and all these things. But it takes time to build some of these things up, but then once they're established, the science, people find a way to get the science done. The meetings are done. So now, like the Southeast Asia Research Initiative will do a meeting every year. And alternated with the meetings for the Land Cover Land Use Change Program. So, you can look at things like that and see how stuff can be made to happen, but it can be a slow process.
Thank you, Jack and Frank, for sharing such a candid conversation with all the audience. This is a wrap for today's panel discussion. If you would like to have a more in-depth conversation with any panelists or JPI representative, I encourage you to stay and find out who the JPIs are and chat them up. The next will be a closing remark delivered by my dear colleague, Jessie Zito from NCURA. Jessie.
Thank you very much, everyone. I have the privilege of thanking the people who helped to organize this. First and foremost, the Woodrow Wilson Center for hosting us here, and in particular, Ann Bowser, who, as you heard earlier, is sick and not able to be here with us today, but none of this would have happened and none of this beautiful facility would have been available without her. Also, thank you to Elizabeth Newberry, whom you have met. And also Jacob Rosen. Thank you very much for making this possible. Thank you, Woodrow Wilson Center. And also, I think probably most of you, if not all of you, have had contact with Berna Windischbauer from FFG, the Austrian Research Promotion Agency. This whole workshop and the one before it is her brainchild. It is her work. She has made this possible. She literally dragged Claire and me all over Washington, D.C. area in order to sell the idea of JPIs to U.S. federal agencies. So none of this would have been possible without her. So thank you, Berna. So before I release us all to quote Dominique, the wisdom that's found in wine and the freedom that's found in beer, which is waiting for us on the 4th floor, I just want to leave us with a few words to conclude and just to highlight some of the things that came up in the panel discussions. One is that I, for one, feel really gratified to see the steps that the different agencies, the different JPIs have decided to take. Some that are first steps, some that are meeting maybe for the first time, some that have met for a number of years, and this is a culmination of a number of steps so that there are clear timelines and clear steps as to how they're going to collaborate on workshops, having calls refer to one another. I think I'd like to leave you with this charge, if you will. For those of you who are with JPIs, for those of you who are working with U.S. federal agencies, and for all of us who have a stake in the research enterprise of one particular country, one region, or the world, let us remember the vision of the JPIs, of the federal research funding agencies, which is that we have a desire to push the frontiers of science, to discover what other ways there are to help humanity become better, and to become better within the world so that we become more sustainable. That's our mission, that's our vision, and they dovetail between the federal agencies and the JPIs. And it's not only with Europe and the US, but also with other countries in the world too. No single country has a monopoly on research and good research and excellent research, and I think we all realize that. And also in many countries, including this country, research funding is not necessarily increasing. So as we heard in a number of the panels, let's think about the reasons making the case for international collaboration. One is that we could have cross-validation, harmonization of procedures, leveraging funding, leverage, right? Leverage worldwide expertise. And in other words, let's get more bang for our bucks, access to patients, a larger patient pool, access to experimental platforms, and aligning our resources so that we can actually get to the place where we find results, we get research uptake, we change policies, and we change the world, if you will, for a better place. Representing NCURA, the National Council of University Research Administrators, and our 7,000 members of people who manage research grants at universities, as well as the 2,000 plus institutions that they are located in, we want to see greater collaboration between the funding agencies so that there are more opportunities to collaborate across national borders. We have seen, and we've seen many studies that say this, that those publications that have authors that are from more than one country have greater impact. And if they have greater impact, that means that the uptake is better. Your university's research rankings goes up also, not to be completely selfish about that. But I also have a personal announcement to make, which is that Friday is my last day with NCURA because I am moving to Georgetown University to be the Senior Director of the Research Services Office there. So speaking from a particular institution's perspective, I would say that Georgetown University, as well as our other peers and other universities, would love to see opportunities for collaboration across national boundaries. So our charge to you, please continue to do what you do. And now let us go and find wisdom in wine and freedom in beer. Thank you very much.